After angry debate, lawmakers decide on a bailout for the financially struggling Detroit public schools. Plus, the DPS Transition Manager and Superintendent talk about what's at stake this school year, and Hillary Clinton makes history. Stay put. Miweek starts right now.
Did you know Roush Enterprises was selected by Google to assemble a test fleet of 100 prototype self-driving cars in 2015? It also produced the new Domino's delivery cars. And speaking of Domino's, Domino's sells well over 2 million pizzas per day around the world, and half of their sales are digital. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Funding is also provided by Delta.
Hi there and welcome to My Week. I'm Christy McDonald. We are so glad that you are joining us. The first holiday of this season has come and gone, and business, civic, and political leaders are back at work after attending last week's Mackinac Policy Conference, and that includes state lawmakers who are back at it this week working on the budget and trying to keep Detroit Public Schools out of bankruptcy. Late Wednesday night, after angry debate, they agreed on a plan. Coming up, we'll talk about the fix, what the fix is for DPS, and how that impacts what will happen next. Also, I sat down with DPS Transition Manager Judge Steven Rhodes and Superintendent Alycia Meriweather on Mackinac Island to get their take on the situation. And Hillary Clinton is headed for the history books. We'll talk about what it means for the presidential election and the state of Michigan. But we do start with the battle in the state legislature over a financial bailout for Detroit public schools. Late Wednesday night, the Senate passed the $617 million plan from the House. It did not have any Democratic support, nor any support from Detroit lawmakers. It will not have the Detroit Education Commission to regulate traditional and charter school locations. It will bring back a city-elected school board. Let's bring in our My Week contributors. You know Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, and filling in for Stephen this week is Free Press columnist Nancy Kaffer. Nancy, welcome back to My Week. It's always good to have you here.
It's always good to be here.
And talking about a subject that we have been now going over, what's happening at DPS for the past year, and waiting to see what this eventual plan will be to bring DPS and really all the schools in Detroit up to speed and where it needs to be for kids to succeed. Nolan, let me get your take on what was finally agreed upon this plan.
Well, I mean, it wipes out Detroit's debt. It'll be the only debt-free district in the state, so that gives it a fresh start, if you will. Gives it $150 million to restart a new district, add programming. There's money in there for raises for teachers. There's money in there for new academic programs and to fix administration. So in that sense, there should be enough money to give this district a healthy start, and it returns local control to the local school board. It asks the school reform office to come up with an A to F grading system so that if you fail 3 years, whether you're a public school or charter, you're closed. I think that was something we need to root out the chronically failing schools. My problem with the legislation from the very beginning is I don't think it was a big enough play to address the challenges of educating a poor urban population. I think it maintains sort of a traditional system of education in the city, and that hasn't worked. I mean, we had a story in the paper today about these horrible rate of chronic absenteeism. You've got to meet the needs of a impoverished population, and I think this just maintains a traditional model of education.
Highlights, lowlights in this for you, Nancy.
Well, that $150 million is $50 million shy of what Judge Steven Rhodes, the school's latest emergency manager, says is necessary to start this new district. So I'm a little concerned that it's a bit of a setup, that the new district is going to be poised to fail by not having enough money to get off the ground. And as Nolan said, when we've seen interventions in urban impoverished school district work, they've been incredibly expensive and comprehensive, like the Harlem Children's Zone, Jeffrey Canada's effort to improve educational outcomes in a 100 square block area of Harlem, offers wraparound services. It starts with parents when children are born to get them involved in coming to school, to get the parents involved in education. This package barely provides enough money to start up this new district, much less the kind of comprehensive effort we need. But worse than that, it so it doesn't have this Detroit Education Commission, which was sort of envisioned as an air traffic controller to ensure that schools are opening in a way that makes geographic sense, to ensure that parents have a real transparent way to measure accountability and performance of charter and public schools. And the worst part is about this legislation is it creates a different standard for education in Detroit that is lesser than the standard of every other school district in this state. The idea that teachers don't need to be certified to teach in Detroit. My child goes to school in Detroit. Why should my child be taught by an uncertified teacher? Would you want your child to be taught by an uncertified teacher?
That's actually an improvement over what other districts in the state has, and it's something that should be extended statewide. I mean, what it does.
How is that an improvement?
It's an option, not a mandate. It allows for innovative education, the sort of things you were just talking about. It allows for partnerships with the community. At the present time, I mean, if you wanted to go in and teach a class on broadcast journalism, you couldn't do it. And you certainly have the expertise to do it. You don't have a certification. That doesn't mean the district can, it doesn't mean the district has to. I mean, it has the option of doing whatever it wants with this, but particularly in career and vocational tech, it opens it up for partnerships with business, partnerships with the community, more innovative education models.
Do you think that'll be used in that way, or do you think it'll be used to plug holes, or just be putting people in places?
If it's used to plug holes, then I mean you fault the school board. The school board has the option to do this or not, and you hope they'll do it the right way.
Nancy?
Could a blogger do your job? Are you ready to step down today and have someone from the community come into your job?
The bloggers are doing my job all over the country. They're doing this.
But you believe there's
that's an individual comment. I think the bloggers could do.
But you believe there is a worth and value to your professional expertise and the training that you have received. Right? You believe there's a value to it. You must, because it's what you do.
A college professor from Wayne State could walk into the Detroit public schools and effectively teach a class.
No. Here's why.
Can't today.
Here's why.
So
okay, Christy, to use Christy as our example here.
You got to finish. You got to each finish a sentence. Go ahead, Nancy.
To use Christy as our example here, Christy has a lot of knowledge about broadcast journalism, but having that knowledge and having the ability to communicate it effectively to children ranging from ages 5 to 18, those are two completely different skills.
She's got a flock of them at home. I'm sure she'll be able to do that.
All right, let's take me out of the picture here for just 1 second here, and I want to talk about the larger problem that I think the Detroit delegation had with what happened here. And last night I was watching on Wednesday night the Senate feed and how they addressed the fact that and it was very sharp. I mean, you had lawmakers calling senators saying you're cowards for doing this, that you have caved to special interests, to the charter lobby, and the disappointment that I think that it came down to a charter versus public argument, which should never have come down to this point.
No, but it should be about education. And the bottom line here was this legislature, Republican legislature, coughed up another $600 and some million in a Detroit rescue on top of the $350 million they did a couple of years ago. That
critics
is a
would
huge
say,
commitment.
though, that was money, that was debt run up under state control.
Of course it was,
so that was something
but this legislature could have stonewalled on it for forever, and they didn't. And
so we're supposed to applaud them for not gamble. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this. We're supposed to applaud them for acting to help more than 100,000 children. Like that's supposed to be like, yeah, you guys didn't drop the ball completely on this.
This district a fresh start.
But you're saying that we should applaud them for not dithering for another year. Like they should have got this sorted out last year.
This legislation was needed, and they delivered it, and they delivered almost all of the elements that the Detroit the Detroit coalition wanted.
Okay, so let's move forward now, and this is what we have. And this is what we have to work with. Nancy, let me ask you, how do you think this is going to impact whether parents enroll their children in DPS in the fall? How this further, defines the education landscape in the city?
I think there's going to be a drop in DPS enrollment. I think parents are unsure about what's going to happen. I think that parents have no confidence in the stability of the system. I think we're going to see a decline in DPS enrollment in the fall. Also, this is happening so late in the school year. A lot of people have made their decisions about where they're sending their kid to school next year already. And if this package had been passed, I don't know, a year ago, and it had had time to go into effect, and it was providing stability, you might start to see an improvement. But at this point, no, I think there's going to be a decline, and that's just going to worsen DPS's problem because of the way funding is linked to enrollment.
I think that's
Nolan,
like
what do you
it's going
think?
to get dark tonight. There's been drops in DPS enrollment going back for as long as anyone can remember. This
I think it's going to be more
legislation
significant
gives
when they
them
say that.
$1,200 additional per student in classroom money, which should allow them to become more competitive. It allows them to raise teacher salaries, which should allow them to compete for better instructors. It provides for opportunities for them to innovate a little, which should make them more attractive to the community.
And it's
But
June,
people
and
have
school
been
starts in
leaving
September.
People have been leaving this district for years because they haven't been satisfied with the product. And unless they improve the product, that's not going to change. They have the resources now to improve the product. I think a good deal depends on what sort of school board they elect.
And
you know, that was the difference in the city.
And they have a start, and now that's going to be the next thing, is seeing who's going to be wanting to run for this position, which is going to be very important. All right, you know, I spoke with DPS Transition Manager Judge Steven Rhodes and Interim Superintendent Alycia Meriweather at the Mackinac Policy Conference. We talked about the efforts to improve academic standards in Detroit Public Schools, and of course they were watching the debate in Lansing very closely. Take a look.
We hope that the final package will be closer to the Senate bill. We support the Senate bill. We think that the elements of the Senate bill are important to the future success of DPS.
Specifically, are you talking about the Detroit Education Commission, or are you talking about the $200 million in startup
Both.
funding?
We really do need both.
And why do you think that we need the Detroit Education Commission? Because that seems to be the biggest sticking point that people are going back and forth about in this last week.
Yeah. The main goal of the DEC is to set the academic standard of excellence for all of the students in Detroit, charter students and DPS students. It's going to set a standard of excellence that all of these schools will be required to try to achieve. And the reason why I support the DPS is because it provides an opportunity for local control over that standard, which we don't have now. I believe in local control. It's why I'm in this job. I want to transition DPS back to local control. And I want to transition all of public education, including the charters, back to local control. I believe in local control.
Alycia, you have taken this job on in probably the most difficult period of DPS history, and I want you to give us a sense of what teachers are telling you, how they feel right now about being in the system, and what parents are telling you about their concerns about if they're even going to have their kids coming back to school in the fall.
Sure. So I think right now, just overall, there's a sense of uncertainty. So what Judge just talked about, we're clearly waiting still for some movement from Lansing. And so that makes everyone who's involved in the situation and connected to Detroit Public Schools somewhat uncertain. So we're looking at, teachers obviously have expressed their frustration in different ways throughout this year around working conditions, around compensation, and really, I think also just wanting something better for both themselves and for our students, of course. Our parents, we have incredible parents who have stayed committed to Detroit Public Schools. And so I want to acknowledge that first. We have a great number of parents who have chosen to continue to send their students to Detroit Public Schools, and they're asking some of the same questions. What will the future be like for Detroit Public Schools? And I guess what I would say about that is these are questions that we're asking, and it's questions that central office and the academic leadership is also exploring, this idea of who do we want to be moving forward, and really laying that vision out and then figuring out how do we get there from here. And obviously finances are a piece of that trajectory, but the other piece, and I've said this before and I'll keep saying it, if we fix the finances but we do not address the issue of academic excellence, we're still in a crisis. And so that's really where we are right now in terms of conversation, trying to get the focus away from the finances. That needs to be taken care of, but when that's done, we need to educate children in the best way possible.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about it because you did come out with an academic advisory council that I do want you to elaborate on a little bit. But before we leave talking about finances, Judge Rhodes, let me ask you, in terms of, you find yourself in this pivotal position again in the city of Detroit. First your work with the bankruptcy case, and now this. Have you found yourself trying to convince people to get on board with what needs to be done here with DPS?
It's so interesting. People understand the need that DPS has for support and for resources. But there are competing demands on the limited resources that the state has, and I understand that. But our need for $200 million is really a very minimal need. If we get less than that, it's going to make it harder for us to set DPS on a path of success, and I'm very concerned about that.
All right, so but once, I mean, to your point exactly, Alycia, I mean, once you have these buildings open, all right, we say, here we are, but you have to change what's happening inside the classroom. And so talk to me a little bit about this advisory council that you're putting together to analyze what's going to be happening here at the end of the year.
So the current academic plan for Detroit Public Schools sets June 30th. So it's a perfect time for us to create a new plan because our current plan expires. Mm-hmm. And during this time of transition, I thought it was really important to involve as many people as possible. And so kind of the way I've explained this is a lot of decisions in the past were made by small groups of people in private rooms, and then were kind of put upon people to implement. And now more than ever, we need to be transparent and collaborative and inclusive. Mm-hmm. And so I made the decision that as we form the new academic plan, that I would try to implement those tenets and put an all call to the entire district and ask anyone who wants to help with our new academic plan to step forth. And we've had 136 people, as of this morning actually, 136 people step up and say, I want to be a part of this. I want to help rewrite the course that Detroit Public Schools is headed towards. And so last week we had our first meeting and 95 people showed up. And it was an extremely powerful and encouraging meeting. And we broke into 13 committees addressing everything from accountability and actually this idea of grading schools, curriculum and instruction, attendance policies, promotion policies. These are all different committees. And what those groups have been tasked to do is to identify at least 10 sources of research on their particular topic that are less than 10 years old and preferably peer-reviewed. Right. Then to identify 3 cities or districts with best practices relative to that topic, and then to make their recommendation for Detroit Public Schools. And so they will then present that to the whole council. And by June 29th, we should have something on our website for the public to respond to. And so I feel very hopeful. And at the end of that meeting, the feedback forms that were collected were just extremely encouraging, because as I flipped through them, the center of the feedback form asked your words, your feelings in one word from tonight's experience. And the words were hope, invincible, encouraged, as I'm going through, and people positive, hopeful. And to me, that showed that not only do we have intellect within our district, but we also have people who are willing to move forward and have hope for our district being better.
All right, turning now to this year's presidential race, Hillary Clinton has made a place for herself in the history books. She is poised to become the first female to lead a major party's presidential ticket. And, no matter what you feel, if you're going to vote for Hillary Clinton or not, I think this week it is a time to take a step back and say, yeah, we've hit that milestone. Nancy, I'm going to start with you, what your reaction has been.
It's pretty amazing. I mean, my mom is 84. She was born in 1931 at a time when women could not get credit, could not get birth control. There wasn't effective birth control. Couldn't really wear pants in most settings. And now she's going to be able to cast a vote for a female presidential candidate this fall. It's huge. It's huge.
Nolan, how would you characterize the impact?
I think, if you look at the conversation this week, it was, sort of taken in stride. It wasn't like, oh my God, how we never believed this would happen. I think there's been, for her as an individual, it was a natural progression, but I also think for the country it was a natural progression. I mean, it wasn't such a big shock as it was, say, when Mondale nominated the first female vice president. I think people sort of expected this to happen.
Go ahead, Nancy.
And what's interesting is that people talk about this. There was, articles about was it inevitable? Well, obviously it wasn't inevitable because no woman has ever done this before. So it's hard for that to be considered a done deal. But what I've seen in the last 2 days is a lot of women reaching out either via social media or personally to say this is so huge. And I didn't want to say this before because a lot of times if you've voiced support for Hillary Clinton, a million supposedly well-meaning people pop up to tell you that you shouldn't support her just because she's a woman, which is pretty insulting. I mean, I don't know anyone who's supporting her just because she's a woman. But I think that you're starting to see women feel more able to voice their support and excitement about it because, she's in the home stretch now.
I think it's interesting, too, that you mentioned that your mother is watching this and saying, oh, gosh, I never thought I would, see the day. How does that translate to younger women women? Because much has been made about younger female voters and how they've broken a lot for Bernie Sanders, or they've taken a different look, or this hasn't been as big of an impact on them. How would you? I guess?
So I'm 40, and my mother was 43 when she had me. So I have an unusually old mother for my age. And I think that for even a woman born when I was born in 1975, it's hard to imagine the world that my mother and even my older sisters were born into. And I don't mean this to sound condescending at all. I think that I and women younger than I am take for granted that we're going to be able to control whether, how often, and if we have children. I think that we take for granted that areas of employment are open to us that weren't open to even my older sisters who are 18 and 16 years older than I am. That they were told in school there were things that they just couldn't do. They were born in 1957 and 59. And I, like I said, I don't mean this to sound condescending. I think that when you've lived one way all your life, sometimes it's the Fair Credit Act wasn't passed until 1974. That was the federal law that said that women didn't have to have a male cosigner to get credit. I mean, this is 1 year before I was born. This is in, this stuff is not ancient history, and I think it's hard to understand that when it's been that way all your life. Like it was a process for me because my mother lived through so many different parts of American history. This is something I had as a constant reminder of, and then my older sisters and my sister pointed out to me this morning that 42% of her graduating class in law school were women. 18% of partners at law firms are women. I mean, there's still an uphill climb, but it's not as visible as it used to be because you're not. I think sometimes it's hard, and I think it's great that younger women are able to live lives that aren't impacted by this stuff, so much so that they look at this whole range of candidates and say, I'm picking this one or I'm picking that one, and that I think that's wonderful that the world has changed so much. But I think that, like I said, it's sometimes easy to forget how shortly, how soon in the recent past things were very, very different.
Hillary Clinton has also had a tough battle with Bernie Sanders, and now Bernie Sanders is meeting today at the White House with the president, and then everyone's talking about how Bernie kind of has to now start to bow out gracefully. Nolan, what are you seeing kind of coming ahead here?
Well, I don't think he's going to bow out until he gets to the convention. I think he's looking for a big platform at the convention. He's still convinced the super delegates might turn. If you look at the polls, he still does better against Donald Trump than she does. Of course, John Kasich did better against Hillary Clinton than Trump does, and he didn't get the Republican nomination. So there's things for him to cling to. He doesn't know where this FBI investigation goes any more than the rest of us. I think he's reluctant to get out, before he's exhausted every possibility. I would think that he's already done that, but he clearly doesn't see that.
Well, is that part of the role of the president, though, now to kind of say, okay, let's talk about what you might need, what you might want, and so we can start to unify a little
So
bit here.
I think there's a window here for Bernie Sanders. I think that he's done an interesting job of changing the conversation in the Democratic Party among progressives about what's possible to do in terms of reform. And I think that he has a real opportunity to shift the party platform, but I think that is a limited window, and I think that's maybe part of what the president might talk to him about. You have political capital to spend, but the closer we get to the convention and you just look kind of like a bitter hanger-on, as opposed to someone who has real substantive contributions to offer. At this point, someone who spent so much time, and whose followers have spent so much time railing against a coronation and asking delegates to disregard the popular vote is basically asking for a coronation, and that's going to get more awkward as the convention approaches.
It's going to be something really interesting to watch this summer, of course, with the Clinton-Trump dynamic. All right, Nancy Kaffer, thanks so much for joining us. Nolan, it's good to see you as always. We'll see you again next week, and that's going to do it for Miweek. Check out miweek.org for all the shows that you might have missed. Plus, we're on Facebook, and we are on Twitter. I'm Christy McDonald. For all of us here at Detroit Public TV, we will see you next week. Take care.